My name is John Callahan. I'm a retired FAA employee. I was the division manager for the Accidents Evaluation and Investigation Division in DC. About 2 years before I retired, I received a call from Alaska region where the region wanted to know what to tell the media. When I questioned, tell the media what, he says about the UFO, and it went downhill from there. What UFO? It turned out I told him what any government employee would do at that time was to tell him it's under investigation. And then I had him send all that data to the FAA's tech center in Atlantic City. The next day, my immediate boss, service director, Javi Safir, and I went to Atlantic City. I had just purchased a new video camera, and I videoed the event. In Atlantic City, we had them play back on a scope, you would call it a scope, a plan view display, PVD, exactly what the pilot seen or what the controller seen, and we tied it in with the voice tape so we could hear exactly what the controller said and what he heard, and we taped it. We came back the next day, briefed the administrator, Admiral Ingen, on what happened. He wanted a 5-minute briefing. After we started the briefing, he wanted to know if he could see the video. We put the video on. He watched the video, the whole video. The next day, he set up a meeting for me to give a dog and pony show to President Reagan's scientific staff and whoever they brought over, and to hand off all that data to them. That morning in the FAA round room, it was either 9 or 10 o'clock, 3 men from Reagan's scientific staff, 3 CIA people, 3 FBI people, and I don't remember who the other guys were, along with all the FAA experts that I brought with me that could decide or talk about the hardware and the software, how it worked. We put on a dog and pony show. We let them watch the video. We had all the data there. We had all the printouts that the computer put out. They got all excited over it. When it was all done, the CIA, one of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy, that this meeting never happened and this event never happened. When I asked him why, I thought it was probably just a stealth bomber at the time, he says, well, this is the first time that we have recorded radar data on a UFO, and these guys are going to get all excited, drooling over all this data. I said, well, you're going to tell the public about it? And he says, no, we don't tell the public about this. It would panic the public. He says, we're going to go back and study this. I said, okay, it was what he was going to do. Now, I've told this story many times, and I get sometimes funny looks from people. I have with me the voice tapes of the controllers that were involved, the FAA original tapes. See, after we handed this stuff off to the president's staff, the FAA didn't know what to do with it. We don't separate UFOs from real traffic, so it's not our problem, okay? I have a copy of the original of the video that we took, which is rather interesting. And once the thing was all over, the reports started coming into my office, but because it wasn't an FAA air traffic problem, the FAA's report ended up on a table in my office. And it stayed there until I retired, when one of the staffers packed up all my gear and helped it move to my house. Also, in a box I found just a few days ago, in my 1992 tax return, I have the target printouts from the computer data, which, so if you wanted to or look at every target that was up there at the time, you can now reproduce this from this piece of paper here. And it's called the UFO incident, Japan 1648, I believe the number was. It happened on November the 18th, 1986. I'm prepared to go to Congress to swear before Congress that everything I've told you people and everything that is here is the truth. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope you'll pardon me. I'm a little bit nervous. My name is Charles L. Brown. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired, subsequently 7 years with the Foreign Service. I like the name Charlie Brown, a gentleman by the name of Charles Schultz, of great talent, sort of elevated the name, if you will. During World War II, I was a young farm boy from West Virginia. I got the patriotic bug, joined the United States Army, ended up flying bombers in Europe, and ended the war transport in the Pacific. Finished college in the late summer of '49, recalled to active duty in the newly formed United States Air Force. I was assigned to an organization called Office of Special Investigations. The Air Force, as most of you know, was formed in 1947. OSI, as a central investigative agency for the Air Force, was formed, I think, in 1948. So everything was relatively new. Needless to say, starting in '47, UFOs were rather new. The Air Force Air Technical Intelligence Center was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I had my office in a building adjacent to it. And our organization was the worldwide investigative agency for the Air Force for any unidentified flying objects. This lasted for about 2 years. The project name was known as Project Grudge. It was a predecessor to a project known as Blue Book, which Ed Ruppelt headed. During my experience with it, I would collect the data I didn't collect it, it was sent into my office. I analyzed it. As a pilot investigator, I was able to offer some bits of advice to the Air Technical Intelligence people. Now, you might visualize a massive office, but as I recall, we had a first lieutenant, a secretary, and a technical sergeant. That was the essence of Project Blue Book when it started, or Project Grudge, Blue Book, and expanded somewhat. During the review as an analyst of these various documentary reports, if you will, or documents, I became clearly convinced that there was substance to what was being reported, in that we had ground visual, ground radar, airborne visual, and airborne radar confirmation of some of these sightings. The individuals who made the sightings were everything from airline pilots, military pilots, police officers, some of the people that your lives depend upon on a daily basis. These are very reputable and credible people. I hope that the testimony here from very credible people will convince you of that and will further Steve Greer's disclosure project, in that pressure needs to be brought to bring this to the attention not only of the Americans, but of people all over the planet. These vehicles have been seen and confirmed all over the planet. I am willing to sign a sworn statement or testify to my judgment and to what I have observed. Such things do exist. Please believe me. Please believe those who follow me. Thank you.
My name is Michael Smith. I was in the Air Force, a sergeant from 1967 to 1973. I was aircraft control and warning operator. While I was assigned to Klamath Falls, Oregon, in early 1970, I arrived at the radar site and they were watching a UFO on a radar that was hovering at about 80,000 feet. It sat there for about 10 minutes and then slowly descended until it dropped off the radar. It was gone for about 5-10 minutes and then instantly reappeared at 80,000 feet, stationary. The next sweep of the radar, it was 200 miles away, stationary. And it hovered there for about 10 minutes and redid the whole cycle twice more. When I found out what you normally do when you see a UFO, I was told that you notify NORAD, you don't necessarily write anything down, you don't write anything down, and you keep it to yourself. It's a need-to-know basis only. And NORAD one night called me about later in the year to let me know as a heads up that there was a UFO coming up the California coastline. I asked them what I should do about this. They said, nothing, don't write it down, it's just a heads up. And then late 1972, while stationed at the 753rd, radar squadron in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, I received a couple panicky calls from police officers who were chasing 3 UFOs from Mackinac Bridge up I-75. So I immediately checked the radar, confirmed that they were there, called NORAD, and they were concerned because they had 2 inbound B-52s going to Kinslow Air Force Base. So they diverted them because they didn't want any proximity of the 2. And that night I answered many calls from the police department, sheriff's department and stuff. And my standard response was that there was nothing on radar. And I will testify to this under oath to a congressional hearing.
Good morning. My name is Enrique Colbeck. I am a air traffic controller. I'm sorry for my English. I'm so scared. I'm not accustomed to talk in front of a lot of people. I'm here because I'm being a witness in an involuntary way on my work. I work in Mexico City as radar controller and the International Airport of Mexico. And I'm going to give an example about this science that we have in Mexico for several years, and this issue happens a lot of times on my country, unfortunately. For example, March 4, 1992, we detected 15 objects west side of the Toluca airport, that is very close of our international airport at 50 miles, more or less. Then July 28 of 1994, we have almost a collision or something that we can name in that way with an international flight, domestic flight of Aeromexico 129, commanded by the pilot Raimundo Cervantes Ruano, that has a trash or something about in his main landing gear in the right leg. That's occurred night at 10:30, more or less. Then in the next week, the same year, in the same moment, the Aeromexico Flight 904 has another almost collision that was reported for the pilot Corso, the Capitan Corso, at 11:30 in the morning, and we detect that object on a radar. Suddenly, just for a moment. Then in the next week we have a lot of sightings reported by the pilots that give us information about the weird traffic or something, brighting lights and different times, and we detect some of them in that week. But in September 15 of 1994, we have a detection about 5 hours, more or less, on a radar and a new equipment that we believe that that equipment was working in not a good way, because it's not human that you have detection by 5 hours of the same object and apparently without movement. Well, we concur with the technical persons of radar in our country that the radar system was working well, and was very exciting, and we surprised when at the next day we received information about a periodist named Jaime Maussan that is studied these cases in Mexico, about that a sighting from a lot of people in the Metepec city. There is another point located southeast of the Toluca airport, about a sighting of the big flying saucer, apparently 50 meters of diameter, then for a lot of people, and that led the trashes something in the ground. Well, next November 24 of 1994, we have on service officially our new radar system, and after that moment we have information very exactly about of these sightings at the same time with the pilots and detections. That's why I'm here, because we consider in my country that this is very dangerous. We have a lot of more cases, but I don't want to use more time in this. But it's very important that the people on the world knows these events and consider that could be very dangerous for aeronautical situation, especially in my country. I don't know why in my country that's occurs frequently, but the point is that happens, and we consider dangers, and we had only, unfortunately, one trash, but we don't want to have another more. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for my English.
My name is Graham Bethune. I'm a retired Navy commander, pilot, had a top secret clearance. 50 years ago, February the 10th, 1951, I was flying from Keflavik, Iceland to Argentia, Newfoundland. It was at night, it was dark. About 300 miles outside of Argentia, I saw a glow on the water, like approaching the city at night. As we approached this glow, it turned to a monstrous circle of white lights on the water. We watched this for a while, the lights went out, there was nothing on the water. Next thing we saw was a yellow halo, small, much smaller than whatever it was launched from, and that was 15 miles away, up to our altitude. Because of the trajectory, I disengaged the autopilot, shoved the nose over to try to go under this thing. At that time, I heard a noise underneath. I thought maybe it hit us. It was actually some of the crew members ducking, and they collided, and a couple of them were injured. Then it appeared over to the right and moved out slowly and flew with us. It was still not at our altitude, but we could see the shape of it. It had a dome. We could see the coronal discharge. I went back aft, let the other pilot, Al Jones, take my seat to see what the passenger's reaction was. Came back to the cockpit, told him not to report anything, simply because what the psychiatrist had said to me, maybe they would lock us up. So basically, the instruments in the cockpit, we had 4 or 5 failures. In the area of magnetic compass, the electromagnetic effect, in area of directional finders, and this type of thing. The craft was tracked by radar in excess of 1,800 miles an hour. It never did get to our altitude. We had 31 passengers, plus the psychiatrist and the crew members that all cited this at different areas. When we landed at Argentia, Newfoundland, we were interrogated by the Air Force, an excellent interrogation, Captain Paulson. When we landed at the Naval Air Test Center here at Patuxent River, we were required by Navy intelligence to make out individual reports. Out of the National Archives, I have the 18-page official Navy and Air Force report. I've made up a report to straighten out all the truth. There's a stack of books out there this high that have written all of this up. So the truth is here. I will testify under oath before Congress that everything that I have said is true.
My name is Dan Willis. I was in the United States Navy. I held a top secret crypto level 14 extra sensitive material handling security clearance. I worked in the code room at the Naval Communications Station in San Francisco. In 1969, I received a priority message from a ship near Alaska that was classified as secret. The ship reported merging out of the ocean near port bow, a brightly glowing reddish-orange elliptical object, approximately 70 feet in diameter, emerged out of the water, shot into space, traveling at about 7,000 miles per hour. This was tracked on ship's radar and substantiated. Years later, I worked at the Naval Electronic Engineering Center in San Diego for 13 years. The co-worker who I worked with worked at the NORAD facility. When he first started working at the facility, he noticed objects going on the screens that track everything out in space and in the air, objects going off the scale, doing right-angle turns. When he inquired, his older supervisor advised him that, quote, it was just a visit from one of our little friends. He thought this was a little unusual. These statements are true. I'm willing to testify under oath before Congress. Thank you.
My name is Don Phillips. I was in the United States Air Force and had worked with certain intelligence agencies of the United States government. Prior to my Air Force, prior to joining the Air Force, I worked for the famous Lockheed Skunk Works. And I was working for them when I was attending college, and I worked for them in the capacity as a design engineer. It was one of my proudest moments of my life to work with a man by the name of Kelly Johnson. A lot of you might be familiar with that. It turns out that the models of aircraft that we were building, as you know, were all classified, were in the deep black, and that I came in on the end of the U2 project. My main project was known later as the SR-71. The SR-71 had a predecessor. It had a special model built for the CIA, and that those models were one passenger, one pilot special aircraft in order to get from one place to another very, very quickly. Now these SR-71s, as we know them, the Blackbird, are the type of aircraft that are still classified in a sense as far as the altitude that it flies at and also the speed records that it holds. I'm very proud to say that this aircraft played a big part in helping to end the Cold War. The aircraft, the predecessor aircraft, there's strong evidence to suggest that perhaps these aircraft had a different role once in the air. Each pilot, and I knew a few of them, each pilot had an assignment before they took off, okay? They learned about the assignment immediately prior to takeoff, and there's strong evidence to suggest that there was a dual role in that they were monitoring some type of traffic to and from planet Earth. This can be verified at a later point. I'll jump into my military experience. My first field assignment for the United States Air Force was at Las Vegas Air Force Station. And that was my first experience with Las Vegas, and I couldn't understand why people were being so excited about going to a place such as this, but I soon found out about a year later. Nellis Air Force Base is located there. Nellis is a major training center for different types of special aircraft and fighter aircraft, one of the premier training sites for pilots all around the world. However, when I learned that my assignment was at a radar site 50 miles out of town, up near Mount Charleston, I had no idea where I'd be, so finally in the daylight I was able to find the location and reported in 1965 for duty. In 1966, early in the morning, about 1 to 2 a.m., I was staying there on base, and our barracks were at about 8,000 feet. I heard a lot of commotion. You know, at that altitude, sound carries tremendously. And I thought, well, it's early in the morning, it's summertime, and it's very warm, and maybe I should get up and take a look. I didn't really want to, but I got up and took a look, walked up to the main road up near my office, which was the commander's office. I was on the commander's staff, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Evans. And I was saying, who's making all this noise? Who's making all this noise at this time of the morning? So when I got within about 50 yards of the 4 or 5 people that were standing there, one being the chief of security, they were looking up in the air, and I says, gee, their heads are all looking at the same direction. Well, I looked up to the west, northwest, and to my amazement, there were lights flashing around the sky, moving at anywhere from what seemed like 2,400 to about 3,800 miles per hour. Now, the fact that we're taking an estimate from a distance, you know, we figured, well, this is quite something. However, we continued to watch these darting lights go across the sky and stop, absolutely stop, come to a dead stop and reverse in an acute angle their direction, and then proceed on in sort of, they were traveling so fast that you could almost see a pattern left by, if you are computer people, when you move a mouse real quick across the screen, you see a little bit of a tail. Well, that's exactly the way these 6 or 7 craft worked. After 5 minutes of watching these things, they all seemed to group up to the west, northwest, okay? They started to come in on a circle. But what I would like to point out is that where they were putting on their display in the north-northwest sky, just directly east of that is what is known as Area 51. Area 51 is a AEC name, okay? Atomic Energy Commission. That was the old name for Atomic Energy Commission. We knew it as the Groom Lake Flight Test Facility in the Air Force. And it was where we tested our aircraft after we got the prototype made from the Skunk Works. So here are these, let's get back to the circle in the sky. What they did was coalesce and started rotating in a circle, and then they disappeared. Well, I thought, gee, this is something that we have to keep quiet. That was verified by the chief of security. But we waited there and talked it over for a little bit, and it seemed like, I think it was an hour. Then came the radar people from the scopes, which were at 10,000 plus feet, came down for their dinner at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the first person off the bus was a good friend of mine, Anthony Kesar. He said, he was white as a sheet, and he says, did you see that? Yeah, we all said, yeah, it was a nice display. What a show. And he says, we documented them on radar. And he says, we didn't give them clearance. We just, the standing order was let them fly through the radar beam. He says, we documented 6 to 7 UFOs. Now, we don't know who was guiding those, but they were certainly intelligent, and we don't know where they landed because they coalesced and disappeared. So I will say at this point, to keep it short, that I will testify under oath as to what I say is true, and I will do so before Congress. Thank you.
My name is Robert Solis. Contrary to what it says on the card, I was not a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force active duty after I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1964 until 1971 and separated as a captain. In March of 1967, I was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, as a missile launch officer, Minuteman missiles. On an early morning of March 16th, 1967, I got a call from my security guard, primary security guard upstairs. We had about 6, as I recall, flight security airmen upstairs. I was downstairs 60 feet underground in a capsule monitoring and controlling 10 nuclear-tipped Minuteman missiles. I got a call that morning that they were seeing strange lights flying in the sky. I disregarded that call, told them to call me when something more significant happened. I got another call subsequent to that call, and this time it was a more intense tone in the guard's voice. It was very clearly very frightened. He said there was a bright, glowing red object hovering outside the front gate. It was oval-shaped,
He had all the other guards out there with their weapons drawn. Right after that call, I woke up my commander, who was on a rest period, Fred Mywald, a retired colonel now, and told him about the phone calls. As I was telling him about the phone calls, my weapons started going down, one after the other. They went into a no-go condition, what we call a no-go condition. They were unlaunchable. We lost somewhere between 6 and 8 weapons that morning within minutes of having received that second phone call of a UFO hovering outside the front gate. Again that morning, after reporting it to the command post, we were informed that a very similar incident happened at Echo Flight. I was at Oscar Flight. They lost all 10 of their weapons under similar circumstances, very similar circumstances, where UFOs were sighted over the launch facilities. They had maintenance crews and security crews out there that had spent the night, and they were reporting UFOs over those sites. And the commander of that flight was Eric Carlson. He also separated as a captain, and the deputy commander was Walt Fiegel. They retired as a lieutenant colonel. We have those witnesses that I just mentioned, the names I just mentioned have spoken of this event before, and they will back up this story. We also have documentation that I received through FAA requests from the Air Force outlining the Echo Flight incident, and including in that documentation a reference to UFOs. We have telexes covering this incident, and in one telex it says the fact that no apparent reason for the loss of 10 missiles can be readily identified is cause for grave concern to this headquarters. This was from SAC headquarters. So we've got those telexes. I've got about 12 witnesses that'll verify parts of this story, including of a man who investigated the incident afterwards for the Air Force, and you'll hear a little bit more about that from the next witness. And also another guard that witnessed a UFO in that same time period, and another officer who retired a full colonel who had other reports of UFOs. Ancillary to that, excuse me, I've got the complete report on a Minot, North Dakota incident. That was Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, which happened in August of 1966. Very similar. UFOs sighted over missile silos, and also a UFO incident that was investigated by the Air Force immediately after our incident within a week. I'm willing to testify to the truth of all these matters that I've spoken about this in front of Congress under oath. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dwayne Arneson. I served 26 years as a communication electronics officer in the U.S. Air Force, all over the world, including Vietnam. I was lucky to be selected to be commander of 3 different units in the Air Force. I held a top secret SCI TK clearance, and for those who don't know, it is slightly above top secret. I retired in 1986 as a colonel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. I would like to relate about 3 different experiences, if you will, that relate to UFOs. As a young lieutenant over in Germany, Ramstein Air Base, Germany, back in the early 60s, I was in charge of the cryptographic center. I had a top secret crypto clearance at that time, and I can clearly recall seeing a message that went through my crypto center which said that a UFO had crashed on the island of Spitsbergen, Norway, and the team of scientists were coming to investigate it. Going forward to the 1967 timeframe, I was assigned to the 28th Air Division at Great Falls, Montana, and I was the officer in charge of the communications center there. Also, I was a top secret control officer for the division. I had a crypto account. I was an account custodian, and I also passed out nuclear launch authenticators. During that time, I can recall seeing a message come through that communications center which said, basically what Bob was just got through talking about, is that a UFO was seen near the missile silos and the missiles were deactivated. Coincidentally, the person that Boeing sent to investigate the particular missile conditions, if you will, what made them shut down, was my first manager at Boeing, Mr. Bob Kaminsky, who has since passed away. And I can recall him on different occasions. He lived close to me in Auburn, Washington. That's where I'm from. And he said, Arnie, he says, those missiles were perfectly clean. That was the result. So the last incident concerned when I was as a commander of the unit in Great Falls, or in Caswell Air Force Station, Maine, I had contacts with the security police at Loring Air Force Base, and they told about UFOs that were seen near the nuclear weapon storage areas on Loring Air Force Base. And I'd be glad to testify to Congress that this is absolutely the truth. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Harlan Bentley. During 1957 and 1959, I was a PFC in the United States Army, stationed north of Washington, D.C. on the Nike Ajax missile base close to Olney, Maryland. In May, this month of 1958, about 6 a.m., I heard a noise outside that sounded like a pulsating transformer. I sat up in my bunk, I looked out the window, I saw a craft heading for the ground and crashed. Pieces broke off of that craft, immediately took off again. So there's a lot more to that story, but I've got to speed this up. Now, the next night, I was on radar duty. I get a call from the Gaithersburg missile base. He says, hey, I got 12 to 15 UFOs outside, 50 to 100 feet above me. So I asked him, I said, what does it sound like? He took his head mic off, held it out the van window, and said, here. And the same sound I heard the previous morning, except a lot more of them. So my radar was on standby, so I immediately turned it on and got the blip just outside of the ground clutter. I marked it on my radar screen. And then for a few minutes later, all of a sudden they took off. As they took off, the sweep came around, hit the blip. The second, and when it came around, it hit it again. That blip was 2/3 away off my radar scope. In order to get that far at a constant velocity was 17,000 miles an hour. That was my first incident. 10 years later, by this time I received a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering, and I was working in California. Now, I'm sorry that all I can say is I was somewhere in California working on a classified project that had nothing to do with my experience that I had there. As I was working, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, California time, I heard a Houston astronaut communication link, comlink. I didn't pay much attention to it until I heard the word bogey. Of course, my ears picked up immediately. An unidentified flying object of some sort, whether it's a craft, meteorite, or whatever, was on a collision course with that module going to loop around the moon. So basically, I listened for some time, and then I stopped and went back to work. And then I heard, there they go. In the astronaut world, some of you may not know this, there's a term called green turtle. And it used to be, I don't know if it is today or not, but it used to be is you're not allowed to use profanity over the net. And the first person that does that, whoever hears it first and says green turtle, that astronaut's got to buy that man and his entire family a dinner at the most expensive place at Cape Canaveral. Well, to end this real quick, one of them said, damn, they went off, the UFOs took off. He says, damn, that was fast. And somebody yelled, green turtle. And then he said another word, a synonym to crap. And then somebody else yelled, green turtle. And you could see him grit his teeth, because now he had to buy 2 expensive meals. And my particular experience, I will testify before Congress if necessary, and explain exactly what happened. Thank you.
My name is John Maynard. I'm retired Army. I retired as a Sergeant First Class. For my entire 21 years of service, I held a top secret clearance. Compartmentalized at times to as high as TK, Omni, Crypto, and others. I had access to very, very sensitive documents. My testimony is basically two-pronged. One, I retired from DIA in 1980. And when as an administrator, you take over an office, you take over everything and you sign for everything. And I signed for well over 2,000 documents. In order to sign and inventory those things, you have to read them. Not word for word, but basically I went through every document to make sure that it was complete. It was there as they told me. I turned my charge over to the next person, those same documents were there. So I got quite a good knowledge of what was going on in those documents, and believe me, there are many, many different references to UFOs. There was also NPIC pictures that shows that it would targeted objects that were casing you out. Now, I worked on the SALT 1 and SALT 2 areas for the office that I worked in. So we were taking pictures all the time for verification of nuclear disarmament. And there were some objects in those pictures that didn't belong there. The second prong to this whole thing is that a lot of people talk about conspiracies over a shadow government. I'm willing to testify before Congress that these black operations do exist. I nearly became part of it. But I saw the light, I think. Or was it? And I got out. And that's it. We have to disclose what we know. And I am willing to testify before Congress under oath, or before any other organization, that what I witnessed was true.
Good morning. My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. Dr. Colley was in charge of that project. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. It didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. A Airman Second Class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an Airman Second Class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. I asked the young man if he'd describe the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning, everyone. My name is Donna Hare, and I worked at Philco Ford Aerospace from 1967 to 1981. During that time, I was a design illustrator, draftsman. I did the launch slides and landing slides, and also projection plotting boards, lunar maps for NASA. We were a contractor, but most of the time I worked on site, excuse me, in Building 8. I had the opportunity to do extra work during downtime, which was between missions, and I walked into a photo lab, which was the NASA lab across the hallway. I had a secret clearance, which is not that high, but I was able to go into restricted areas, which this was. At the time, I was talking to one of the techs in there, and he drew my attention to a photograph, a NASA photograph. It had a dot on it, and I said, what is that? Well, he drew my attention to it, and I said, is that a dot on the emulsion? And he said, and he's smiling, and he has his hands crossed, and he said, round dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground. And this was an aerial photograph of the Earth, I'm assuming the Earth because it had pine trees on it, and the shadows of the craft or whatever it was were in the same angle as the trees. And by its very nature, UFO, and I wanted to clarify that to a gentleman that was talking to me, means unidentified. So I did not know what this was. But I realized at this point that it's very secret, that it was kept secret, because I asked him, what are you going to do with this piece of information? And he said, we always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public. So they're pesky little creatures appearing on this photograph they wanted to get rid of. After that, I decided I would ask questions to other people that work there. And I found that I had to ask them away from the site and not on site. A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him, who was in green fatigues, watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one, and it was a picture of a UFO, and he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head, and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out, and he's terrified, so he would have to be protected. Another incident, I knew someone in quarantine with the Apollo astronauts. He told me that the Apollo astronauts saw craft on the moon when we landed, and that is what he told me. And he also was afraid. He said that the astronauts are told to keep this quiet. They're not allowed to talk about it. So I do want to let you know that I worked out there for a number of years, and I ran into this. So it's not something everyone knows that works out there for a long time. My boss didn't know about it. Some people that sat right next to me didn't know about it. It's very strange, because I don't know how they can do it, but they can let some people know about it and then others not. I'm willing to testify before Congress that what I'm saying is true, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press. My name is Larry Warren. 20 years ago, in 1980, I was a security specialist assigned to RAF Bentwaters, Woodbridge, NATO Air Force facilities in Suffolk, East Anglia. I had a secret security clearance. I guarded our backline nuclear weapons that were stored there at the time, without the knowledge of the people of Great Britain. I went through a portion of a 3-night UFO event where objects made incursions over our WSA, fired pencil-thin beams of light into them, and adversely affected the ordnance, possibly. These objects were on the ground on 2 different nights. potentially there was another life form seen. This is an unpopular truth. These events were of extreme defense significance to not only Her Majesty's government, but this government as well, and they are still shrouded in secrecy. They are very complex, they are very vast. This is more about a human rights issue than just a UFO issue. 20 years ago, this room would be empty. I see a turn in history. This is history in motion, but unfortunately it's history with the security classification. I would be more than honored to swear under oath that I experienced what I did, I saw what I saw. These events produced not only, after numerous denials by this government, a memo by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, our deputy base commander, which reads like science fiction. It also produced, years later, an on-site audio tape he made as these objects performed their feats and did what they did and violated airspace. These events are of extreme defense significance. I hope my brothers in arms that went through these events will be given immunity at some point and be able to join us here. It is an honor to share the stage with all of these people. And I think for all our children, my son Dennis, God bless you, son, we can change the world. You're heroes for being here also, and I will testify in front of Congress if asked to. God bless. Thank you.
Hi, my name is George Filer III. The reason I'm here is because George Filer V is in the hangar and will be born on Friday. And I'm a retired intelligence officer and flyer with almost 5,000 hours, and I didn't believe in UFOs until London Control called us in the winter of 1962 and asked us, would we chase one? And we said, sure. So we let down from 30,000 feet to 1,000 feet where the UFO was hovering, and we went into a steep dive and actually exceeded the red line of the aircraft. So it's kind of dangerous chasing UFOs. In any case, I was able to get the UFO on the aircraft radar at about 40 miles, and we could see a light out in the distance, and as we closed, we kept on picking up this radar return. Point I'm mentioning that the radar return was very distinct and solid, indicating it was some kind of a metallic object. We got about a mile from the UFO, and it kind of lit up in the sky and went off into space, very similar to what the shuttle looks like when it takes off. Later on, I was working in intelligence. In Vietnam, I briefed General Brown about UFOs. When I was in 21st Air Force, in McGuire Air Force Base, I briefed General Glau about a UFO over Tehran, Iran in 1976. That two F-4s from the Iranian Air Force had taken off and tried to intercept the UFO. And when they turned on their fire control systems, they immediately went on. All the electrical systems went out. The planes had to return to base. This was particularly significant because it was also picked up on satellites. In 1978, on January 18th, I was going into the base. Every morning I did the briefing to the general staff, and I noticed that there are some lights off in the distance at the end of the runway there. And when I got into the command post, the senior master sergeant in charge said that there had been UFOs in the pattern all night. They're on radar. The tower had seen them. They got in aircraft reports and so on. And that one had landed or crashed at Fort Dix. Fort Dix and McGuire are right together. And this is kind of like the Roswell of the East. But in any case, an alien had come off the craft and had been shot by a military policeman and apparently was wounded and was heading for McGuire. So for whatever reason, the aliens liked the Air Force better than the Army, perhaps because they're shooting at them. But in any case, our security police went out there and found him on the end of the runway dead. And they asked me to brief the general staff, General Tom Sadler, and at the 8 o'clock stand-up briefing, and I said, I don't think I want to do this. You know, the general doesn't have a good sense of humor, and I'm not sure I believe this. So I did some checking, called the 438th Command Post, and everybody had pretty much the same story. And at 8 o'clock that morning, just before I went on, was going to brief this, and I was very worried about it. They said, don't brief it, that it's too hot, so to speak. That's pretty much my story, and I'm prepared to tell the story in front of Congress, and it is the truth. Now, because of this, I've stayed interested in UFOs, and I'm the Eastern Director of the Mutual UFO Network. And between the National Reporting Center and Peter Davenport and the MUFON, we get 100 reports a week on average of people from all over the United States that see these things regularly. And if you start checking, they're out there and they're low, and people are seeing them all the time. And these are highly qualified people, all of whom essentially give us the reports by email. Thank you.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear surety. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases, about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is, we've set back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved would have been were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mark McCandlish, and for the last 21 years, I have worked as a conceptual artist for a variety of defense contractors. I've been involved in conceptual artwork of the production thereof for Rockwell on the X-30 program, and also on the HISTEP program. That's spelled HYSTP, means Hypersonic Testbed Program. During the course of my career, I've twice had a secret security clearance. In 1967, while my father was stationed at Westover Air Force Base, the headquarters for 8th Air Force Strategic Air Command, I witnessed and watched through a telescope a UFO which hovered over a nuclear weapons storage facility for approximately 10 minutes and then departed with an acceleration approaching a bullet leaving a rifle barrel. Oh, I'm sorry. In 1988, in November, a college buddy of mine, an associate by the name of Brad Sorensen, informed me that he had personally witnessed 3 flying saucers at a very large hangar at Norton Air Force Base during the course of an air show that was held on Saturday, November 12, 1988. I subsequently called my congressman from that district. I called his office. This was Congressman George E. Brown, Jr., who at the time was the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Space Science and Advanced Technology. I naturally assumed that since this presentation that Brad talked about was for top military brass and certain congressional individuals, that his office must have coordinated this with the local Air Force Office of Public Affairs. A male staff member in Congressman Brown's office not only confirmed the exhibit, but the fact that there were 3 discs at that exhibit. These discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles, also nicknamed the flux liner because they used high voltage electricity. Let's see. To keep things short, this is a diagram that I made based on a sketch that Brad Sorensen did for me in rough form shortly after he had his sighting, and subsequently cleaned that drawing up and made it much more accurate. And that's the drawing that Dr. Greer is holding there now. Later on, I obtained photographs that were taken in 1967 by a military pilot, Harvey Williams, flying a C-47 for the Air Force at 12,000 feet, approximately 25 miles southwest of Provo, Utah. This particular vehicle matches the so-called ARV in all proportions and respects in terms of the detail of the shape of the craft. And this was photographed, as I say, in June or July of June of 1967. I later spoke to a gentleman by the name of Kent Sellen that I met at an air show at Edwards Air Force Base in 1992, the first unveiling publicly of the B-2 bomber. He indicated to me that in 1973, when he was a crew chief working on experimental aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base, that he had unintentionally wandered into an area where there was a classified aircraft, namely the ARV. He described it in detail, and he added other details to the account concerning the configuration and the operation of the vehicle that Brad Sorensen was not aware of. Subsequently, Brad Sorensen met with the famous aeronautical designer Burt Rutan, gave him a copy of this blueprint which you've just been shown. Mr. Rutan felt that it was a joke and put it on his wall as kind of a joke. And a third party confirmed for me later that a Colonel Ray Walsh from Edwards Air Force Base was visiting Mr. Rutan, saw this blueprint on the wall and registered quite a degree of shock and anger, wanted to know where the hell he got this blueprint, because there was in fact such a craft at that time, approximately 1994-95, in a hangar at Edwards Air Force Base, North Base Complex at that time. Subsequently, I've done a lot of research on this product, this vehicle. I've come across a number of declassified documents that show that the Air Force, as early as 1960, was wind tunnel testing flying saucer shapes up to Mach 20. And I also have declassified NASA documents that show similar shapes. In fact, this is the document here that more or less details the wind tunnel testing up to Mach 20. This is the NASA document right here that was declassified, and it shows a variety of spherical and lenticular shapes that were flight tested up to, or I should say wind tunnel tested up to Mach 6. I subsequently obtained a copy of an interoffice memo from Hercules Aerospace that describes a particular type of science involving something called zero-point energy and scalar waves. According to Brad Sorensen, this is the basis of the technology for these anti-gravity propulsion systems. This particular document here describes 6 different meetings involving the Defense Intelligence Agency and cooperative efforts with the Russian scientific community in investigating this, what is called the fundamental enabling technology that was originally discovered apparently by Nikola Tesla in the early 1900s. Anyway, I could provide you much more detail at a later time, and I am prepared to testify in detail concerning these events and their truthfulness before Congress. Thank you very much.